Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up important articles of the day from the newspaper and discuss them in detail as per the demands of Civil Services exam. Articles covered today are displayed on your screen and their notes in PDF and Word format are provided in the description box down below. Without further ado, let us begin.
Before starting off our today's discussion, let me inform you that the GS Prelims and Mains Integrated Quality Improvement Program is beginning from tomorrow. That is, classes are starting from 2nd of September. And this program, it will involve more than 350 hours of current affairs, prelims and mains revision classes. Further, these classes will be available in a hybrid mode, as you can attend classes in both live as well as from online mode. The backup of all these classes will be available till the mains exam of the year 2024. Further, you can also test your skills using 88 prelims and mains test, and you will be also provided with a personal mentorship. Additionally, you will also have the flexibility to attend the test as per your own schedule. Hence, to enroll for first 5 classes which is open to all, please log into our eLearn platform. Starting off our today's discussion with first article of the day, and it appeared in page 18 of today's Hindu newspaper. In this article, it describes about ONDC framework. As this network, it presents an opportunity for businesses of all sizes to connect and transact seamlessly. And as per a white paper which was released by Deloitte India, it held that the ONDC, also known as Open Network for Digital Commerce, it will emerge as a pivotal force which will enhance India's digital commerce sector. It is projected to touch $350 billion valuation by the year of 2030. And in this regard, the topic of ONDC is a subject of our today's discussion. Further, this topic is important from GS Paper 3 perspective, which deals with infrastructure. Also, a question on e-commerce, it appeared in the mains of the year 2015, as it asked us a question on how e-commerce can help us to overcome the bottlenecks that are associated with supply chain management in the food processing industry. Further, a related topic, which was Unified Payment Interface, it was asked in prelims of the year 2017. Hence, this topic is important from both mains as well as prelims perspective. Now, in the scope of our today's discussion on open network digital commerce, we will first discuss why is there a need for ONDC, as we will discuss issues that are associated with e-commerce sector currently in India. Further, after discussing challenges that are associated with e-commerce sector, we will take a look at what is an ONDC project. Additionally, we will also discuss its benefits with respect to consumers, sellers as well as platform perspective. Further, before concluding this article, we will also discuss challenges that are associated in implementation of ONDC projects, followed by a suggestive way forward as was suggested by Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion in dealing with challenges that are associated with e-commerce sector in India currently. Now, the first challenge that is associated with e-commerce sector, and the reason why we need ONDC, is because there is limited competitiveness in the e-commerce industry. As currently, the platforms which enable digital marketplaces for buyers and sellers, they have currently evolved into providing large integrated solutions. For example, platforms like Flipkart and Amazon, they provide integrated services to buyers such as warehousing, logistics, payment under a single service provider. And this has led to rapid growth of platforms such as Amazon and Flipkart. Further, this limits the competitiveness of emerging players, as there are high entry barriers currently. Although more and more platforms they are becoming online, the extent of investment which is required to provide an integrated solution services is currently very high, and this limits the number of players in the e-commerce industry. Further, there are significant concentration risk in the e-commerce sector. As with increasing size of platforms, both buyers and sellers they are faced with concentration risk. As most of the trade in digital commerce, they are taken under one or two platforms currently. And in case of a failure, the access to digital commerce services will be limited significantly. Further, with concentration of digital commerce, it can also mean less freedom to small and medium businesses. And this means that small and medium businesses they lose the choice and freedom of participation at their own will or terms. And this means that small and medium businesses they will have to eventually accept the terms and conditions that these limited platforms subscribe to. And hence, it limits the choice and freedom of participation of these businesses at their own terms. Further, concentration in digital commerce sector it has also led to duplication of efforts as well as infrastructure. As creation and maintenance of new platforms, it requires a separate infrastructure and processes, which adds to the cost of participation in digital commerce, leading to high entry barriers. Also, limited participation of platforms in e-commerce industry, it means that there are lack of flexibility with respect to participation. As each platform, they have their own sets of terms and conditions, and it limits the flexibility of sellers to constrained extent and diversity of participation. Further, limited amount of sellers, it also leads to limited choice and discoverability. As buyer and seller, they need to be on the same platform in order to discover each other. And such lacuna, it leads to limiting of choices and discoverability within the fragment collection of platforms. Now, after we have discussed the challenges that are associated with e commerce, hence there's emerged a need for an open network of digital commerce. And in this regard, let us discuss what is an ONDC. Now, Open Network Digital Commerce, it has been established as a first of its kind initiative globally, and it has paved the way for reimagining of digital commerce in India. This open network digital commerce, it represents a paradigm shift from a currently operator driven monolithic platform centric model. In the current model, the buyer and seller they need to be on a same platform in order for the transaction to take place between them. For example, if a buyer is registered on Flipkart, then he can only purchase a product which is available with a seller who is also registered on the same platform. Whereas, if a seller is available on Amazon, then the buyer needs to install another application in order to purchase that same product from a different buyer. However, this can be overcome by an open network concept. As open network, it is a facilitator driven decentralized network. And in this platform, the buyers and sellers they can transact no matter what platform or application they use. For example, if a buyer has installed a Flipkart application, and this means he can also buy a product from a seller who is available on Amazon or another e-commerce site. Hence, this open network it enables wide scale participation of digital commerce system through multiple gateways. Now, what are the benefits of such open network digital commerce? Let us discuss this in the next slide. Now, Open Network Digital Commerce or ONDC, it acts as an evangelist for technology platforms. Now, there are several benefits for sellers, buyers, as well as technology platforms. For sellers, ONDC provides access to more buyers, which means there are greater opportunities for growth of sellers. Further, it also offers significantly higher discoverability of businesses and products and provides them at a very low cost. Further, ONDC also provides the seller autonomy on terms due to multiple choices of being digitally visible. Further, it will also provide sellers with lower cost of doing businesses, as well as it provides seller with wider options for value chain services. For example, logistics. As sellers currently, they can evaluate multiple options and use the most cost effective option in order to deliver their products. And this means it will further lower the cost of doing businesses for sellers. Whereas for buyers, ONDC provides access to more sellers, and this in a way provides buyers with more choices that will lead to sustainable and improved price discovery in a long term basis. Additionally, buyers will also experience an enhanced level of service as it will lead to faster deliveries due to access from hyper local retailers. And this will eventually lead to improved customer experience, which will be further enhanced by scope for innovation. Whereas for technology platforms, ONDC it provides access to growth from digital commerce as it will support customers on both buyer and seller applications. Further, ONDC will also reduce time to market as well as time to scale as it will reduce the time which is taken for a product currently in order to reach the final consumer. Further, ONDC will also help these tech platforms to focus on niche consumers. Additionally, ONDC also provides these tech platforms with newer opportunities to drive innovation. And this innovation will eventually trickle down to e commerce value chain services. However, despite several benefits of ONDC, there are many challenges that are associated with implementation of an open network digital commerce project. What are these challenges? Let us discuss in the next slide. Now, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce it has presented a report on promotion and regulation of e-commerce in India. And this report it highlights various challenges that the ONDC project is facing currently. The first challenge pertains as there are no roadmap and strategies on some key aspects. As the ONDC entity currently, it is silent on issues such as onboarding of existing digital commerce apps, compatibility, as well as interoperability of existing platform and applications, as well as technical capability of small and medium enterprises which are onboarded on digital network. And the ONDC currently it does not lay out a roadmap or strategy in order to address these issues. Further, development of ONDC might mean as the local businesses they will find it extremely challenging to compete with large e-commerce players as these large e-commerce players they provide discounts, sales and other lucrative offers, and this might result in local businesses failing to compete with these large players. Additionally, the ONDC platform it is currently silent on the issue of liability. As the ONDC entity, it is silent on issue which is regarding to liability on the network in the case the consumer faces issues which might be related to transaction, delivery of substandard product or with lack of desirable services. Further, the ONDC platform it provides no clarity on how the existing laws and regulations on e-commerce will be applicable as there is no clarity on existing e-commerce laws as well as regulation which are related to foreign direct investments. Now, despite several issues in implementation, the ONDC is seen as a way forward in furthering the e-commerce industry in our country. Hence, the Parliamentary Standing Committee in this regard, it has given out a few concrete strategy in order to improve the implementation of open network digital commerce. What are these strategies? Let us take a look in the next slide. Now, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce, it has recommended the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, also known as DPIIT, to formulate a key strategy on e-commerce industry. And this strategy, it should specifically focus on onboarding the existing platforms into the ONDC network. Further, the DPIT, it should also ensure that there should be a level playing field which should exist between small and local businesses on one hand and e-commerce giants on the other hand. Whereas there's also a need to provide technical support to small and local businesses in order to help them design a technical tool which is compatible to this ONDC protocol, as it will aim to achieve the intended goal of widening the participation in e-commerce as well as digital onboarding of MSMEs onto the ONDC platform. Further, there's a need to provide clarity regarding the issue of liability on networks by assigning definite roles and responsibilities to all participants, which can be e commerce platforms, buyers, as well as sellers. Further, there's also a need to clarify the extent of application of e commerce rules such as FDI regulation on ONDC network. Hence, with a focus of above aspiration, such as onboarding existing platforms, ensuring a level playing field between small businesses and large platforms, providing technical support to small businesses, clarifying the liability and application of e commerce rule, will help ONDC to enhance the market potential of digital commerce in the retail sector. As ONDC, it is expected to fuel significant growth over the next 5 years. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on open network digital commerce. Now, moving on to the second article of the day, which appeared on page 15 of today's Hindu newspaper. This article reports that the Union government on Thursday it announced a special session of Parliament from 18th to 22nd of September, which will be shortly held after the conclusion of G20 summit. And this session it will have 5 sittings, and the government it is looking forward to fruitful discussions and debates in the Parliament. Now, this topic is important from GS Paper 2 perspective, as it currently deals with Parliament and state legislature as well as their structure, functioning, conduct of businesses as well as issues that are arising out of these businesses. Further, this topic is important from mains perspective. As a question, it appeared in mains of the year 2017, which asked us to determine the provisions for holding joint session in the two houses of Parliament. Further, it also asked us to enumerate the occasions when this could normally happen, along with their reasons. Further, a question on session of Parliament, it also appeared in prelims of the year 2020, which asked us the question whether President can summon a session of Parliament. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion, we will first determine what is a parliamentary session, while at the end, we will discuss steps that can be undertaken in order to make the calling of such sessions a more democratic affair. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion by discussing what is a parliamentary session. Now, Parliament, it exhibits 4 broad functions. Now, Parliament, it has a legislative responsibility. As Parliament, it is central to ensuring that the laws and policies passed by the Parliament, they reflect the will and interest of the people in general. Further, Parliament also has a oversight responsibility, which ensures that the executive, that is the government, it performs its functions and duties satisfactorily. Also, Parliament has a representative responsibility. As Parliament, it represents the views and aspirations of people of their constituency in the Parliament. In the end, Parliament also has a power of purse responsibility, which means that Parliament it approves and oversees the revenues and expenditures which are proposed by the government of the day. However, the Parliament it does not function for the entire year. Rather, the legislators they remain in their constituencies and serve the people. However, legislators from various parts of the country They congregate at the floor of the House during the specified period in a year. And this is when the Parliament is called into session. Now, Constitution of India, it does not specifically say when or for how many days should a parliament meet. Rather, the Article 85 of the Constitution, it says that there should not be a gap of more than 6 months between the two parliamentary sessions. Hence, by convention, the Parliament of India, it meets for 3 sessions in a year. The first session in a year is called budget session, which is usually held towards the beginning of every year. The second is monsoon session, which is of 3 weeks of duration, and it takes place in the month of July and August. The third is the winter session, when the Parliament meets in the month of November and December respectively. The dates for each of these sessions are announced at least 15 days in advance, which allows the members of the Parliament to submit their questions and give notice for parliamentary interventions. Now you may ask, who has the power to summon a Parliament? It is the President who has the power to summon the Parliament. However, the President summons the Parliament on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. Hence, it can be said that the power of summoning the Parliament rests with the central government. Now, it may be noted that the Parliament sittings in general have reduced. From about 120 days a year at the beginning, it has reduced to about 65 to 70 days per year in the last decade. And this has been due to frequent disruptions which leads to adjournments. The first step in order to improve the functioning of the Parliament pertains with diluting the power of the government as a sole decider of parliamentary session dates. As currently the government's power to convene the Parliament, it is in conflict with the principle of executive being accountable to the legislature, as government might delay the calling of session of a Parliament in order to circumvent debates. Further, the Parliament should have more sitting and with a clear plan of these sittings. Now, the National Commission for Review or Working of Constitution, it has suggested that the number of sittings of Parliament should be fixed, with Lok Sabha sitting for about 120 days every year and Raj Sabha sitting for about 100 days every year. Further, the calendar of sittings of the Parliament needs to be announced at the start of the year, and this will help members plan better for the whole year, and it reduces the scope of the government to postpone a session if it wants to defer a parliamentary scrutiny on some emerging issue. Further, there is a need to encourage the e-petition system. Under this system, a fixed number of people, let's say 10,000, they may sign an e-petition on certain issues, and the Prime Minister or the Minister concerned will have to reply on it. And when such petition is signed by more than say 1 lakh people, the issue, it needs to be debated at the floor of the House. And hence, it will improve the ability of Parliament to uphold the government's accountability. Further, the opposition needs to be more responsible. As members of the opposition, they must question, object, and suggest alternative course of action. However, they must do so by being reasoned and using persuasive arguments. Also, there is an immediate need to have electoral reforms, which might introduce public funding of elections or combine with political reform that maintains disclosure of sources of financing for political parties. And this will lead to decriminalization of current politics. Also, there should be a provision of holding a special session, which can be convened to provide an opportunity to fix a broken parliamentary calendar. And it will also enable finishing of unfinished legislative business. And these steps will help Parliament to regain the trust of people. Hence, it is essential to conclude that by diluting the power of the government, having more sitting with a definite calendar, encouraging an e-petition system, responsible opposition, undertaking electoral reforms, and having a provision for special session will enable a better functioning of Indian Parliament. Because parliamentary sessions are important as it provides a platform for democratic discussions. Further, Parliament is also responsible for upholding the executive's accountability. And a functioning Parliament will enable the legislature to uphold the executive's accountability. This was all for today's discussion on parliamentary sessions. Now, moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared on page 15 of today's Hindu newspaper. Now, the Union government's decision to hold a special session of Parliament from 18th to 22nd of September, it prominently came during the talks among opposition parties. And some parties, they have argued that this special session, it could be an indication that the government would call in an early election or could club the elections of state assemblies and Lok Sabha together. And this, it brings our attention towards the concept of holding simultaneous election in our country. Now, the concept of one nation, one election, it is defined as structuring of Indian election cycle in such a manner that the elections to Lok Sabha as well as state legislative assemblies, they would be synchronized together. And in such a scenario, a voter who would normally cast his or her vote to elect members of Lok Sabha as well as state assembly on a single day and at a single time. For example, you reside in Old Rajendra Nagar locality in National Capital Territory of New Delhi. This would mean that you would vote for Rajendra Nagar assembly seat as well as New Delhi Lok Sabha seat on a single day. This simultaneous election, it was a norm up till the year of 1967. However, after dissolution of some assemblies in 1968 and 1969, followed by dissolution of Lok Sabha in 1970, it meant that elections, they are now held separately. Now, this topic is important from GS Paper 2 perspective, which mentions salient features of Representation of People's Act. Further, in the mains of the year 2017, question appeared on simultaneous election to Lok Sabha and state assemblies, and it asked us to discuss whether it will limit the amount of time and money spent in electioneering. Further, in the prelims of the year 2017, a question directly appeared on manner of election to Lok Sabha or state assembly. Hence, this topic is important from both mains and prelims perspective. In the scope of our today's discussion on one nation, one election, we will first discuss why is there a need to hold the elections in a simultaneous manner. Further, we will also discuss the criticism that the concept faces. Following which, we will discuss a way ahead which will suggest measures in order to conduct the elections to both Lok Sabha and state assemblies in a simultaneous manner. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion by discussing why is there a need to hold simultaneous elections. Now, after an election is declared, the model code of conduct, it comes into play, which is there for the entire duration of the election cycle, right from declaration of election till declaration of its results. And during the time model code of conduct is in play, the government, it is restricted from making major policy decisions. Hence, it would mean that if an election, it is held for multiple times in a year, then frequent imposition of the model code of conduct, it will lead to policy paralysis. Further, frequent election, they also disrupt the public life as it impacts the functioning of essential and developmental work, because most of the government staff, they are busy in the election process. Further, elections, they involve huge election expenditure, which is done by various stakeholders such as political parties and individual candidates. And frequent election, it would mean that the party would require large amount of fund, which may further lead to menace of criminalization of Indian politics. Further, frequent elections, they also require deployment of security forces for law and order purposes. And this would mean that these security forces, they are diverted from their usual internal security purposes. Hence, simultaneous election, it would mean that the requirement of security forces for election process, it would reduce substantially. Additionally, frequent elections, they also hamper legislative work, as it may lead to government enacting populist measures which will further lead to reduction of public resources, and it has a significant impact on the public exchequer. Further elections, it leads to perpetuation of identity politics, where candidates they appeal to voters based on their caste, religion as well as communal affiliation. And these identity politics, it further perpetuates the divide in the Indian society. Also, there are many invisible and incalculable socio-economic costs that are associated with election process. As for election duties, teachers from schools and colleges they are deputed as an election staff, whereas the entire revenue machinery it is involved in election related work. Also, offices and vehicles of the government they are put on use for election purposes, and this costs millions of man hours of the government, and it also leads to loss of teaching weeks or badly delivered or undelivered welfare schemes. And these socio-economic costs of elections they have never been calculated. Hence, there is an imperative need to hold simultaneous elections. However, this concept is also subjected to several criticisms. What are these criticisms? Let us take a look in the next slide. The first criticism that the one nation, one election concept faces is related to synchronization of terms of state assemblies as well as Lok Sabha. As synchronization of terms of legislature, it would require expansion or reduction of terms of various state assemblies, which may prove difficult in current socio-economic circumstances. Further, even if such synchronization is achieved, it is also difficult to sustain such synchronization, as both Lok Sabha as well as state assemblies they do not have a fixed term, and they can be dissolved at any point of time as desired by the government of the day. Further synchronization, it would mean that we need to curtail the state legislature's power to unseat a government. As the state legislature, it can bring a no confidence motion against the government of the day. However, restricting such powers, it would go against the spirit of federalism which forms the part of basic structure of our Indian constitution. Also, clubbing of state and central election would also have a negative impact on our voters' behavior, as national and state issues they will be entangled together, and this would mean that the state issue will have to give way to national issues. Thus, it will negatively impact the voting behavior of Indian voters. Further, frequent elections and their results they are also necessary for government to make necessary course correction. And in case of absence of frequent election, it would mean that the government would be unable to take such course correction, and it will negatively affect the interest of Indian voters. Further, undertaking simultaneous elections would also impose several logistical challenges, which may be related to arranging of electronic voting machines, manpower, as well as security forces for election purposes. In the end, one nation, one election would also bring a comparative disadvantage to the regional parties. As national parties, they have more resources when you compare it with regional parties. And when there's a requirement of huge election expenditure on account of simultaneous election, it would mean that the regional parties will be at a significant disadvantage. Now, after we have discussed the severe criticisms that the one nation, one election concept faces, let us discuss a road ahead on how such simultaneous election could be undertaken in a conducive manner. The first suggestion in this regard it comes from Parliamentary Standing Committee, which suggested that the simultaneous election it can be covered in two phases. As phase 1, which involves syncing of national election with some state election, whereas the second phase it will undertaken in a midterm of the Lok Sabha, and thus it is envisaged to conduct elections in every 2.5 years. Further, there is also need to avoid premature dissolution of state assemblies, as Election Commission has made following recommendations in this regard, as there is a need to bring confidence motion along with no confidence motion. Further, fresh election could also be conducted for remainder of this period, and this would mean that we can avoid premature dissolution of state assemblies. Further, the Parliamentary Standing Committee has also made recommendation regarding scheduling of by-elections, and it recommended that by-elections to all the seats that become vacant during a period of 1 year may be conducted in a predetermined period. Also, Law Commission published a white paper on simultaneous election, and it recommended that the definition of simultaneous election it needs to be incorporated in the section 2 of Representation of Peoples Act. Further, the Law Commission also recommended the amendment of Constitution as well as Representation of Peoples Act, which will enable the government to conduct midterm elections only for the remainder of period. Further, the Law Commission also recommended the need to amend anti-defection law, as it can be amended to provide exemption in order to prevent stalemate in the assemblies in case of hung parliament. Additionally, the Law Commission also recommended extending the statutory limit of 6 months for issuance of notification for general election, and this would mean that the Election Commission of India would have the flexibility in conducting simultaneous election. In the end, Law Commission's white paper it also recommended that the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister it may be elected by the full House in a similar manner that the election of Lok Sabha Speaker takes place, and this would ensure that the government of the day would have the necessary stability. Hence, to conclude, we can say that implementing the Herculean task of one nation, one election, it would require coordination and consultation among all stakeholders. Further, a phase-wise synchronization of both Lok Sabha and state assemblies, which was suggested by a parliamentary committee, may also be undertaken instead of a one-shot mechanism. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on one nation, one election. Now moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared on page 10 of today's Hindu newspaper. Now the Uniform Civil Code is again in news as the government is holding a special session of Parliament in the month of September, and there are chances that the government may introduce a Uniform Civil Code in one form or the other. Hence, the topic of Uniform Civil Code is important from GS Paper 2 perspective, as it mentions Indian Constitution and its significant provisions. Further, the topic of Uniform Civil Code, it was asked in the mains of the year 2015. Also, the Directive Principles of State Policy, under which Article 44 mentions the Uniform Civil Code, is also an area of interest with respect to prelims, as a question on Directive Principles and involving Uniform Civil Code it appeared in the prelims of the year 2012. Hence, in this regard, we will take a look at what is an Uniform Civil Code. Further, we will discuss arguments that both support as well as reject the idea of Uniform Civil Code and its implementation in Indian context. Before concluding this discussion, we will also discuss a way forward so as to what can be done in order to make our personal laws more equal in nature. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion by discussing what is a Uniform Civil Code. Now, a Uniform Civil Code, it is referred to as a single law which is applicable to all citizens of India in their personal matters such as marriage, divorce, custody, adoption as well as inheritance. Now, this Uniform Civil Code it is intended to replace a current system of fragmented personal laws, as these fragmented personal laws they currently govern our interpersonal relationships, and it is segregated as per different religious communities. Now, Article 44 of our Indian Constitution, it lays down that the state shall endeavour to secure a uniform civil code for its citizen throughout the territory of India. However, as per Article 37, Article 44 is not justiciable in nature, which means it is not enforceable by any court. Hence, it is at the discretion of the Government of India to bring a uniform civil code in our country. Now, what is the need to bring a uniform civil code? Let us discuss this in the next slide. Now, the first argument that favors the imposition of uniform civil code is that it will simplify the Indian legal system. As currently, our personal laws are determined based on our religious belief. For example, Hindu Code Bill, it determines the personal laws of people who follow Hindu religion, whereas Shariat law, it determines the personal laws of people who belong to Islamic religion. Hence, there is a need for a uniform civil code as it will simplify this complex set of laws which determines how our marriage ceremonies takes place or determines our inheritance, succession and adoption of children. Further, this same set of uniform civil code will be applicable on all citizens of our country, hence bringing all citizens under a uniform set of personal laws. Further, there are few arguments that favor uniform civil code because it is envisaged that such a uniform civil code will bring gender equality. As most of the religious and customary personal laws currently, they are biased in favor of men. And these personal laws, they not only violate a right to life, liberty and dignity, which is guaranteed under Article 21 of our Constitution, but they also reinforce patriarchal stereotype notions. Therefore, a uniform civil code is a need of the hour to bring gender equality. Further, there are few Supreme Court judgments they have favored uniform civil code in one form or the other. For example, Muhammad Ahmad Khan versus Shah Bano case of the year 1985. In this case, the Supreme Court declared that the lady Shah Bano, she was entitled to maintenance even after completion of iddat period. And in this regard, the Supreme Court went against the Shariat law. Further, in the Jordan Dingde versus SS Chopra case of the year 1985, Supreme Court it emphasized the urgency of implementing a uniform civil code. Also important judgment in this regard is the Sarla Mugdal judgment case versus Union of India in the year of 1995. And in this judgment, the Supreme Court reiterated that the Parliament should frame a uniform civil code, as it will help the cause of national integration by removing contradictions which are currently based on religious ideologies. Also, argument which favor implementation of a uniform civil code is that there is a need to create segregation between our religious as well as secular activities. As the Supreme Court in S.R. Bommai case, it held that the matter of religion is a matter of individual faith, and hence it cannot be mixed together with secular activities such as marriages and inheritance. And hence, secular activities can be regulated by state by enacting a law. Further, a uniform civil code will further our country's diversity, as it will help promote national integration, as currently different set of laws among different religious groups, they breed communalism. Whereas on the other hand, a single secular law which governs various aspects of personal matters, it will arouse a sense of oneness and a national spirit in the members of our country. Hence, after we have discussed arguments which favor implementation of uniform civil code, let us discuss the other side of this argument, which means arguments that are against the implementation of uniform civil code. The first argument in this regard is that there are currently diversity in our secular civil laws. For example, Indian contract laws, Code of Civil Procedure as well as Transfer of Property Act, they are enacted by the Parliament of India. However, states, they have made hundreds of amendments in matters of civil law, and hence there are currently diversity even in our secular civil laws. In this regard, diversity in personal laws may also be acceptable. Further, the argument against uniform civil code also hold that the secular state, that is India, it should not interfere with matters of our personal laws, as a uniform civil code is seen by many as a contradiction of our fundamental rights such as Article 25, which guarantees individuals fundamental right to religion. Also, Article 26 Part B, it gives right to each religious denomination to manage its own affairs in matters of religion. Whereas Article 29, it gives right to conserve distinctive cultures of minorities. Hence, if a state decides to make personal laws, it will be violative of Article 25, Article 26 as well as Article 29 of our Indian Constitution. Further, enacting a single secular law would also go against the notion of our Indian diversity, as efforts have been made to reconcile our diversity with universal and indisputable arguments on human rights. And in this regard, enacting a uniform civil code will go against the idea of unity in diversity. Further, there are also lack of national consensus on the issue of uniform civil code. And in this regard, uniform civil code, it is a politically sensitive issue. And there are still many organizations who advocate rights of minorities as well as many clerics who oppose implementation of uniform civil code. Also important in this regard is the views of Law Commission, which does not support implementation of uniform civil code. As Law Commission, in its 2018 consultation paper, it held that uniform civil code is neither necessary nor desirable at this point of time. Rather, the Law Commission suggested that codification of all personal laws should be taken so that prejudices and stereotypes in each and every one of these laws would come to light and they individually can be tested on the anvil of fundamental rights of our Indian Constitution. Hence, what should be the way ahead in implementation of Uniform Civil Code? Let us take a look in the next slide. The most important aspect in imposition of Uniform Civil Code is the need to evolve a national consensus on this issue. As a Uniform Civil Code, it cannot be imposed currently without a need for a broad consensus. And even in a debate in Constituent Assembly, it noted that it would be unwise to enact a uniform civil code ignoring a strong opposition from any community. Hence, there is a need for an effective information, education as well as communication campaign in order to make people aware of significance of uniform civil code. Further, there is an imperative need to eradicate discrimination which currently exists in Indian personal laws. As the Law Commission in its 2018 paper, it underlined the need to eradicate discrimination. And in this way, differences which exist in personal laws which are meaningful, they can be preserved and inequality, they can be weeded out to a greatest extent possible. Also, there is an imperative need to reform personal laws in our country. As in absence of a consensus on a uniform civil code, the best way forward for India is to preserve the diversity in our personal laws, which will ensure that they do not contradict our fundamental rights. Even the Law Commission of India, in its 2018 paper, it suggested certain measures in marriages and divorce that should be uniformly accepted in personal laws of all religion. Further, there should also be an attempt to enact a model uniform civil code, as it will embody what is best in all personal laws. And this model uniform civil code, it can be a synthesis of what is good in our all diverse personal laws. Further, as the Law Commission in its 2018 paper, it also highlighted the need for codification of personal laws, as through codification, we can arrive at certain universal principles that prioritize equity rather than imposition of a uniform code. Hence, through evolution of a consensus on the Uniform Civil Code, eradicating discrimination that currently exists in our personal laws, by reforming personal laws, enacting a model uniform civil code, as well as codification of personal laws is an ideal way forward before we can implement a uniform civil code in our country. As ours is a secular democratic republic and the freedom of religion, it remains core to our Indian culture. But we must also ensure that these religious practices they must not violate the human rights and dignity of an individual. Therefore, a unified civil code is imperative both for protection of the oppressed as well as to promote a national unity and solidarity. This was all for today's discussion on Uniform Civil Code. Now, moving on to the last article of the day, which appeared in page 1 of today's Hindu newspaper. This article reports that Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, also known as OCCRP investigation, it revealed fresh charges of allegation against the Adani Group. And in this context, the opposition parties they have demanded an inquiry by a joint parliamentary committee. And this it brings our attention to the importance of parliamentary committees in upholding the executive's accountability to Indian legislature. And this topic it is important from GS paper 2 perspective as it deals with parliament and state legislature as well as their functioning. Further, parliamentary committees are also important from mains perspective. As in the mains of the year 2018, a question appeared on why parliamentary committees are considered useful for parliamentary work. Also, the issue of parliamentary committees it finds itself in the prelims of the year 2018 as a question appeared on following parliamentary committees such as Committee on Government Assurances, Committee on Subordinate Legislation, Rules Committee, as well as Business Advisory Committee. Hence, in our today's discussion on parliamentary committee, we will first identify the types of various parliamentary committees. Then we will discuss the importance of parliamentary committee in ensuring the accountability of executive to legislature. Further, we will also discuss issues that functioning of parliamentary committee it currently faced with in the Indian context. Before concluding this discussion, we will also take a look at suggestive way forward in order to improve functioning of various parliamentary committees. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion by discussing different types of parliamentary committees. Now, parliamentary committees, they are primarily of four types. The first is a financial committee. As these committees, they are primarily responsible for scrutinizing the expenditure priorities of the government of the day. And these committees, they suggest measures to improve efficiency in spending and performance of public sector undertakings. The Parliamentary Account Committee and the Estimates Committee are examples of such committees. Further, there are standing committees as well. And these standing committees are also known as departmentally related standing committees. They are aligned with specific ministries and examine their performance and budgets. Further, they also examine the bills and subjects which are related to their respective ministries. For example, there is a committee on railways as well as there is a committee on health. Now, the third type of a committee is called an ad hoc or select committee. And these committees, they are formed for analyzing a specific legislation or policy, and these committees are disbanded after they submit their reports. For example, there was a select committee on GST which suggested measures to improve the functioning of GST. The fourth and the last type of a committee are known as administrative committees. As these committees, they are primarily responsible for ensuring the day-to-day activities of legislature that are planned in consultation with members. For example, there is a business advisory committee of both of the houses. There is a rules committee as well as a privileges committee, and these fall under the category of administrative committees. Now, after we have discussed the type of committees, let us discuss what are the importance of having such committees. The first importance is that they are specialized in nature. As these committees, they perform a specialized jobs, whereas ad hoc committees, they are constituted in order to perform a specific task. Further, these committees they provide an opportunity for detailed scrutiny of legislations, as due to magnitude of work and limited time which are available for functioning of Parliament, the MPs, they are unable to comprehensively scrutinize a legislation on the floor of the House. Also, the working of the Parliament is affected often. However, these committees they function throughout the year and they provide the ability to scrutinize a legislation in a detailed manner. Further, these committees they offer parliamentarians a forum to develop expertise. As anti-defection law, it does not apply to functioning of these committees, and decisions in these committees they are usually made beyond party lines. Hence, they provide a platform for building consensus on various issues. And detailed discussion in these committees, they help MPs develop expertise on certain subject matters. Further, these committees provide an opportunity for members of the parliament to engage with relevant stakeholders. As parliamentary committees, they regularly seek feedback from citizens and experts on the subjects which it examines. For example, the RBI governor was summoned by the finance committee on subject of demonetization. Also, these committees enable the parliament to uphold the government's accountability in a better manner, as it increases the ability of a parliament to scrutinize government policies. Thereby, the executive is accountable through an informed debate in the legislature. These committees they examine various budgetary allocation and the reports of these committees are discussed on the floor of the House. Further, these committees also help in resolving issues which are related to certain bills. For instance, a joint parliamentary committee was formed on a matter of data protection, and this committee it suggested changes to the original draft which has since been incorporated in the new bill. Also, these committees provide knowledge reservoir. As Indian parliamentary committees, they offer a huge reservoir of information which are then made available to the members of the parliament in order to enlighten themselves, and it contributes to idea of strengthening the parliamentary system, thereby improving the governance in India. Now, parliamentary committees, despite its importance, have faced certain issues in its functioning. What are these issues? Let us take a look in the next slide. The first issue that parliamentary committee faces is that fewer bills have been referred to it in the recent times. As in 14th Lok Sabha, there were 60% of the bills that were referred to parliamentary committees, whereas in the 15th Lok Sabha, about 71% of the bills were referred to parliamentary committees. However, this number it dipped sharply to about 27% in 16th Lok Sabha, hence signifying that fewer bills have been referred to these parliamentary committees. Also, these committees see poor attendance of members. The attendance of members in such committee meetings have been a cause of concern, which has reduced to about 50% attendance since the year 2014 and 15. Further, these committees they provide short tenure for their members, as these committees they are constituted for a period of 1 year, and it leaves very little time for members to develop specializations. Further, there has been a lack of discussion on these committee reports, as these reports they are recommendatory in nature, and reports of these committees they are not taken up for discussions in the parliament except for references in debates on certain bills. Further, there has been a lack of required expertise among the members of the committees. As members of the parliament, they are generalist in nature. Hence, they lack technical expertise which may be required to go into intricacies of specialized subjects which come under the consideration of various committees. Further, there has been a trend of politicization of proceedings of parliamentary committees, as with greater public interest in some issues, members of the parliament they have started taking strict party lines even in these committee meetings, and this has negatively affected their functioning. However, despite certain issues, there are many measures that can be undertaken in order to improve the functioning of parliamentary committees. What are these measures? Let us take a look in the next slide. The first measure suggests that there is a need to extend the tenure of committee members in order to fully utilize their developed expertise, which may be on a particular subject of legislative work. Further, there is an immediate need to provide research support to MPs. As institutional research support, it will allow the committees to examine issues that are technical in nature, and these bodies will then serve as expert bodies, and it will enable them to examine complex policy issues. Further, there has been an immediate need to establish committees that have a wider mandate. For example, there is a need to establish a committee on economy which will provide the space for deliberations on economic policies and its implementation separate to that of finance committee. Further, there is a need to avoid overlapping functions, as additional responsibilities of the financial oversight can be given to a committee on economic issues, which will then do away the existing finance committees, and it will help avoid overlapping on work on budgets, etc. Further, there is a need to have a regular monitoring on functioning of these committees, as there is a need to formulate mechanisms for regular assessment of performance of these committees, and these assessment reports need to be made public. Further, it is apparent that India should adopt best practices of other countries, as in several countries the concerned ministers they also appear before committees to elaborate and defend the policies of government, whereas in India ministers they don't appear before these committees. Also, there is a need to refer every bill to these committees, as it will enable deeper scrutiny of issues that may affect the functioning of such policies. Hence, to conclude, it can be said that strengthening of the committee system can go a long way in improving the quality of laws that are drafted by our parliament, and it will also help minimize the potential implementation challenges. Hence, the need of the hour is for greater and effective utilization of parliamentary committees in order to strengthen the parliament's function as a deliberative body, and it will enable effective oversight of executive as well. This was all for today's discussion on parliamentary committees.